I'm going to say something that sounds cruel, but it's precise. The people with the greatest advantages in dating often make the worst decisions about love. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack options, but because they have lived their entire lives inside a distorted version of reality. I've watched women who are brilliant in every measurable way, elite degrees, sharp judgment, professional dominance, repeatedly fail at the most basic human task, forming a stable, honest relationship. And the more beautiful they are, the more predictable the failure becomes. That pattern is not accidental. It's structural. What if the problem isn't personality trauma or bad luck? What if the problem is that no one has ever told them the truth, not once? Not when it mattered, not when it could have changed everything. In this video, I'm going to dismantle a comforting lie about beauty, intelligence, and attraction. I'm going to explain why extreme attractiveness quietly destroys relationship judgment, and why the people affected by it rarely realize what's happening until it's too late. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you value calm, honest analysis over noise, consider subscribing. I want to begin with a woman you already know, even if you've never met her. I've worked with her. I've watched her present in boardrooms. She has an elite education. Think Ivy League, an MBA that opens doors without knocking. Her thinking is structured. Her analysis is clean. She can take chaotic data and turn it into decisions that save companies millions of dollars. When she speaks at work, people listen. When she leads, outcomes improve. On paper, she is everything competence looks like. And then the meeting ends. She suggests the team celebrate at a high-end restaurant, not casually, with expectation. She assumes the company will cover it. When there's hesitation, she looks genuinely confused. Not offended, confused. As if the idea that this might not be automatically approved never crossed her mind. Later, in a different conversation, she says something else just as calmly. Men should always pay. That's what gentlemen do. She doesn't say it with anger or entitlement. She says it like a law of physics. Gravity, obvious, non-negotiable. People exchange glances. No one challenges her directly. They smile, they nod, they move on. A few weeks later, she's venting privately. Another relationship ended, the third in a row. She doesn't understand why. She did everything right. She's attractive. She's loyal. She's accomplished. She knows her worth. The confusion on her face is real. There's no performance here, no manipulation. She truly cannot connect cause and effect. This is where the dissonance becomes impossible to ignore. You've seen this woman everywhere. The stunning colleague who can dismantle complex systems but cannot understand why men won't commit. The gorgeous friend with a PhD in psychology who believes her appearance exempts her from developing relationship skills. The woman who is devastatingly effective in structured environments and catastrophically ineffective in intimate ones. What matters is not that she's beautiful. What matters is where her competence collapses. Her intelligence works when feedback is honest, when performance is measured, when outcomes are tied to reality. In business, bad decisions cost money. In school, wrong answers fail exams. Reality corrects you quickly. But relationships don't work that way for her. In her romantic life, feedback is distorted. Consequences are delayed. Information is filtered. She is surrounded by people who have strong incentives not to tell her the truth. And over time, that changes how her mind models the world. This is the mistake people make when they look at women like her. They assume contradiction means hypocrisy. They assume entitlement means arrogance. They assume confusion means stupidity. That's lazy thinking. The truth is more unsettling. She is operating with bad data, and she has been for most of her life. Beauty doesn't lower intelligence. It corrupts feedback. It changes the information environment so completely that even very smart people begin to make irrational decisions, specifically in the areas where their beauty alters how others respond to them. At work, no one wants to sleep with her. There is no sexual incentive to protect her ego. So people are honest. They disagree. They challenge her ideas. They point out flaws because doing so improves results and carries little personal cost. In dating, the incentive structure flips. Now the people evaluating her want something from her body, her attention, her approval. Suddenly, honesty becomes expensive. Disagreement becomes risky. Truth threatens access. So the information she receives changes not occasionally, not subtly, but systematically. Men laugh when they should challenge. They agree when they should push back. They validate when they should warn. Not because they're evil, because they're rational. And over time, she internalizes this pattern. She begins to expect agreement. She interprets disagreement as disrespect. She learns that confidence is rewarded even when it's disconnected from reality. She mistakes desire for endorsement, attraction for approval, attention for truth. This is why the contradiction is so stark. She can be hyper-competent in every domain where reality speaks back clearly and deeply confused, in the one domain where reality has been muted to protect other people's incentives. When she says men should always pay, she's not making a strategic claim. She's repeating a belief that has never been corrected. When she expects special treatment, she's not demanding it consciously. She's operating inside a world where that treatment has always been provided. And when her relationships fail, the failure feels random to her, sudden, unfair, as if outcomes are disconnected from behavior. Because in her experience, they often are, at least at first. This is what people miss. She is not rewarded for understanding relationships. She is rewarded for being attractive within them. Those are not the same skill, and one actively suppresses the development of the other. The more beautiful she is, the less accurate the feedback becomes. The less accurate the feedback, the weaker her internal model of cause and effect. And the weaker that model becomes, the more confidently she makes decisions that quietly sabotage the outcomes she claims to want. She doesn't feel reckless. She feels reasonable. That's the most dangerous part. From her perspective, the world keeps malfunctioning. Men leave without warning. Commitment disappears. Promises dissolve. And every explanation she receives protects her self-image rather than clarifying reality. You don't become wise by being praised. You become wise by being corrected. She has been praised relentlessly and corrected almost never. So when people say, "How can someone so smart be so bad at relationships?" the answer is simple. Intelligence doesn't survive long in environments where truth is systematically removed. And for her, the truth didn't just disappear. It was never allowed to exist. The core mistake people make is assuming this distortion happens occasionally. It doesn't. It happens continuously. Once a woman becomes highly attractive, truth doesn't merely weaken in her environment. It disappears. Not dramatically, not with confrontation. It fades quietly, replaced by something far more adaptive for the people around her. Strategy. When a woman possesses something men want intensely, her beauty, her attention, her body, the rules of communication change. The goal is no longer accuracy. The goal becomes access, and anything that reduces the probability of access gets removed from the interaction. Truth is usually the first casualty. This isn't about a few dishonest men. It's about incentives. When honesty decreases your chances and agreement increases them, rational behavior selects for agreement. Over time, only the messages that align with her expectations survive. Everything else gets filtered out. Think about what that means in practice. Every opinion she hears is shaped by desire. Every piece of feedback is softened, adjusted, or omitted. Every disagreement is framed as support. The signal she receives is not what is real, but what is safe for the speaker. She doesn't notice the pattern because it's consistent. Consistency creates credibility. When everyone says the same thing, it feels like truth. When no one challenges you, it feels like confirmation. And so she builds a worldview. She learns what men want. She learns what men respect. She learns what men should tolerate. But none of this knowledge comes from men acting without incentive. It comes from men managing risk. This is where the damage begins. Human understanding is built through corrective friction. You test a belief. Reality pushes back. You adjust. Over time, your model improves. That's how intelligence compounds. But what happens when reality never pushes back? What happens when every mistake is smoothed over by validation? When bad assumptions aren't challenged, but reinforced? When the feedback loop is broken, not by malice, but by desire? You get confidence without calibration. She starts believing that attraction equals endorsement, that attention equals approval, that interest equals agreement. She mistakes politeness for alignment, desire for respect, compliance for commitment. And because the pattern repeats with hundreds of men across years, the illusion hardens. From her perspective, men behave irrationally. They agree, then leave. They validate, then disappear. They promise, then withdraw. It feels inconsistent, unfair, random. But it isn't. What she never sees is the hidden layer beneath those interactions. The layer where men are constantly deciding what to say based on what keeps them in the game. The layer where honesty is considered a liability. The layer where disagreement is treated as self-sabotage. This creates a parallel reality. In that reality, expectations don't get corrected, they expand. Boundaries don't get negotiated, they get assumed. Behavior doesn't get consequences. It gets tolerance until it doesn't. And when tolerance finally collapses, it feels abrupt, like betrayal, like abandonment without cause. Because the cause was never communicated honestly in the first place. This is why I say truth goes extinct. Not because men consciously agree to deceive her, but because the environment selects against anyone who doesn't. The men who tell the truth early get removed. The men who lie survive longer. Survival biases the data. Over time, the only voices she hears are the ones that learned how to say what she wants to hear. That's not malicious. It's mechanical. The tragedy is that she interprets this environment as evidence of her understanding rather than evidence of its absence. She trusts her conclusions because they've never been challenged. She believes her strategies work because they've never been tested properly. And when things fail, she doesn't revise the strategy. She looks for a new man. That's what makes this self-destructive. She keeps applying the same model to different variables, expecting a different result. And each failure doesn't weaken the model, it strengthens it. Because the explanations she receives after the failure protect the model rather than question it. He wasn't ready. He was intimidated. He didn't know what he had. These explanations feel supportive. They feel kind. They also ensure nothing changes. Truth would sound very different. Truth would be uncomfortable. Truth would suggest limits, trade-offs, personal contribution to outcomes. And truth would threaten the image that keeps her desired. So truth gets buried. The result is someone who becomes highly skilled at navigating environments where incentives are neutral schoolwork structured systems, and increasingly incompetent in environments where incentives are distorted. She isn't bad at relationships because she's incapable. She's bad because she's been protected from learning how they actually work. This is why intelligence doesn't save her here. Intelligence amplifies input. When the input is false, intelligence builds more elaborate justifications for bad conclusions. Smarter minds don't resist bad data. They optimize it, and the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to correct. By the time someone finally tells her the truth, it doesn't land as information. It lands as hostility. It feels wrong, aggressive, disrespectful, because it violates decades of conditioning. She doesn't hear this is how cause and effect work. She hears you are being attacked, and so the person telling the truth gets labeled insensitive, insecure, or dangerous. They are removed. The environment returns to equilibrium. Validation resumes. The distortion deepens. This is how someone can become a master of self-sabotage without ever intending harm. She doesn't choose the wrong outcomes. She chooses actions that feel reasonable within a warped model of reality. And she does so calmly, confidently, and repeatedly. From the outside, it looks like entitlement. From the inside, it feels like confusion. And until you understand how thoroughly truth has been removed from her environment, that confusion will never make sense. Because you're evaluating her decisions using reality. She isn't. To understand how complete this distortion becomes, you have to go back to the moment it starts. Not adulthood, not dating apps, not her first serious relationship. It begins much earlier. She's 13, maybe 14. Yesterday she was invisible. Another awkward kid trying to survive school homework and social hierarchies she barely understands. Her body hadn't made any promises yet. Her presence carried no weight. Adults spoke to her without hesitation. Boys treated her as a peer or not at all. Then puberty arrives. Not gradually, violently. Her body changes faster than her mind can keep up with. Curves appear. Her face sharpens. Her voice softens. And overnight, the way the world looks at her changes completely. Men stare, not just boys her age. Grown men, teachers, coaches, friends' fathers. Strangers in grocery stores, on sidewalks, at gas stations. She feels eyes on her before she understands what those eyes mean. Attention arrives before context. Power before comprehension. This is the detail people gloss over, and it matters more than anything else. She is still a child. Her emotional regulation is undeveloped. Her sense of identity is fragile. Her understanding of male psychology is non-existent. But she has been handed adult-level influence over adult male behavior. That combination is unstable. Her calendar says 14. Her nervous system says 14. But her effect on the world is no longer proportional to her age. Men respond to her in ways she cannot interpret accurately. They become careful, polite, over-accommodating, protective, sometimes inappropriate, often confusing. She didn't earn this power. She didn't ask for it. And she certainly wasn't trained to handle it. The world doesn't slow down to help her adapt. It accelerates. Adults stop being honest, not explicitly, subtly. They soften their words. They avoid directness. They become aware of her feelings in a way they weren't before. Male authority figures hesitate. Male peers compete. Male strangers test boundaries. She learns something without anyone teaching it. Her reactions move people. Discomfort in her face changes male behavior. Approval opens doors. Withdrawal creates anxiety. She notices that saying no carries weight. that silence creates tension, that attention is a resource. But she doesn't understand why, and no one explains it to her truthfully. They can't. The truth would be too complex, too uncomfortable, too risky. So instead, they adapt. They manage. They navigate around her emotions rather than through them. This is where truth quietly exits her life. Not because people intend harm, but because honesty feels dangerous around a teenage girl who suddenly has leverage she doesn't understand. Adults worry about saying the wrong thing. Boys worry about rejection. Men worry about consequences. So they choose the safe path. They agree. They affirm. They avoid confrontation. She doesn't experience this as deception. She experiences it as reality. By the time she reaches adulthood, the pattern is fully set. She has learned that her feelings shape outcomes, that discomfort creates compliance, that desire produces accommodation. She has learned that people change when she reacts, but she has never learned why. And because she never learned why, she never learns limits. This is the most important asymmetry in the entire dynamic. Power arrives before wisdom, influence before understanding, effect before explanation. Most forms of power in life come with built-in correction mechanisms. You fail, you lose, you adjust. But the power of beauty does the opposite. It insulates you from immediate consequences. It delays correction. It softens feedback at the exact stage where learning should be sharpest. So while other adolescents learn social cause and effect through rejection, embarrassment, and failure, she learns something else. She learns that people bend. And because she is young, she assumes bending is normal. She doesn't think I am influencing this person. She thinks this is how the world works. She internalizes accommodation as baseline behavior. When people don't accommodate, it feels wrong, aggressive, unfair. She grows up expecting the world to adjust to her emotional state because it always has. This isn't entitlement in the way people imagine it. It's conditioning. And once conditioning sets in early, it's incredibly hard to undo. From that point forward, her interactions with men are never neutral. They are never clean. They are always contaminated by attraction, fear, hope, or desire. Even men who want to be honest hesitate. Even men who start honest learn quickly that honesty costs them access. So the incentive structure locks in. Tell her what she wants to hear and you remain in her orbit. Tell her what she needs to hear and you disappear. Over years, this produces a devastating outcome. She becomes emotionally confident without being emotionally calibrated. She develops certainty without understanding. She mistakes influence for insight. And because this began when she was still forming her identity, the distortion feels like self-knowledge rather than conditioning. By the time she's an adult, no one remembers when it started, not even her. It feels natural. It feels earned. It feels like maturity. But it isn't. It's an unexamined power that arrived too early and stayed too long without accountability. This is why later conversations fail so badly. When a man tries to explain cause and effect to her, it feels foreign, hostile, infantilizing, because it contradicts not just her beliefs, but her entire developmental experience. She isn't resisting truth consciously. She's defending the only reality she has ever known. And that reality was built when she was still a child, surrounded by adults who chose comfort over clarity. That's where the disaster begins. Not with arrogance, not with manipulation, but with a girl who was handed adult power before she had adult understanding, and then raised in an environment where no one dared to correct her honestly. Once you see this, the rest becomes inevitable. Once that early conditioning is in place, The system no longer needs to be enforced consciously. It runs on incentives alone. By the time she is an adult, men do not have to coordinate to mislead her. They don't even think of it as lying. They simply learn very quickly what works and what doesn't. This is where the mathematics becomes brutal. Being honest with a highly attractive woman does not increase your chances of intimacy, commitment, or continued access. In many cases, it does the opposite. It introduces friction. It creates emotional discomfort. It positions you as a threat rather than an ally. Being strategically agreeable, on the other hand, produces predictable rewards, positive reactions, warmth, continued interaction, sometimes affection, sometimes sex. That asymmetry shapes behavior with ruthless efficiency. I call this the honesty-intimacy contradiction. The very thing she needs most in order to make good decisions, accurate feedback, is the thing men are least incentivized to provide. And the thing that damages her understanding, strategic affirmation, is the thing men are most rewarded for. This is not a moral failing. It is an economic one. Imagine a classroom where a teacher asks for honest opinions, but any student who disagrees with her preferred answer is publicly humiliated. The student who echoes her view is praised. After a few rounds, what happens? The class stops thinking. It starts guessing what she wants to hear. Honest students fail. Strategic students succeed. Now imagine that classroom lasts 20 years. That is the environment many beautiful women live in with men. She asks, "What do you think?" But the question is not neutral. The correct answer is pre-selected. Any deviation is interpreted not as information, but as disrespect. And because she reacts emotionally rather than analytically, the penalty for honesty is immediate and personal. Men learn this fast. They learn that disagreement leads to conflict, that critique leads to withdrawal, that challenging her assumptions leads to accusations of insecurity, negativity, or lack of support. They also learn that agreement feels good. Validation smooths things over. Saying you're right keeps the door open. The risk-reward calculation becomes obvious. The probability that an honest answer will align perfectly with what she wants to hear is extremely low. Even if your feedback is accurate, useful, and well-intentioned, it still threatens her self-image. So the odds are stacked against you. Strategic agreement, by contrast, has a near-perfect success rate. You don't have to be right. You just have to be soothing. Men are not stupid. They optimize for outcomes, not principles. When honesty consistently produces rejection and agreement consistently produces access, behavior adjusts accordingly. What no one explains to her is the downstream cost of this adaptation. Each lie protects the man in the short term, but it corrupts her model of reality in the long term. She makes decisions based on false assumptions, gets bad results, and then receives more lies to explain why the false assumptions didn't work. The cycle feeds itself. She learns that men leave for mysterious reasons, that failure happens despite her doing everything right, that the solution is to double down on the same strategies with a different man. And because the explanations she receives never challenge her framework, the framework never changes. This is how dysfunction becomes stable. The most dangerous part of this system is that it feels supportive. No one is yelling at her. No one is insulting her. No one is telling her she's wrong. Everyone appears kind, understanding, empathetic. But kindness without honesty is not kindness. It is sedation. Over time, she becomes surrounded by what economists would call a selection bias. The only men who remain are the ones willing to agree. The ones who would tell the truth have already been filtered out. by earlier interactions. From her perspective, this confirms her worldview. Everyone agrees with me, she thinks. So I must be right. She never sees the invisible graveyard of men who disagreed once and disappeared. This creates a perverse form of confidence. Not confidence built on competence, but confidence built on unchallenged assumptions. And the longer this goes on, the more rigid those assumptions become. Eventually, even well-meaning honesty feels like an attack. When someone finally does speak plainly, she doesn't evaluate the content. She evaluates the tone, the emotional impact, how it makes her feel. And because it feels bad, it must be wrong. This is where the contradiction becomes catastrophic. Men lie to survive the interaction. She needs truth to survive the outcome. But the system rewards the opposite behavior on both sides. From the man's perspective, telling the truth feels like volunteering for rejection. From her perspective, hearing the truth feels like betrayal. So both sides unconsciously collaborate to keep reality out of the conversation. And the more attractive she is, the stronger this collaboration becomes. What starts as a small distortion hardens into a worldview. She doesn't just believe men should behave a certain way. She believes they do behave that way, because that's what they've always told her. When reality finally asserts itself, when men leave despite the validation, when commitment evaporates, when attraction fades, it feels sudden and unjust. She doesn't see the years of misalignment that led there, because no one ever told her the truth when it mattered. And the cruel irony is this: the men who lie to her often believe they are being nice. They think they are sparing her feelings, avoiding conflict, keeping the peace. They don't see that they are slowly poisoning her understanding of how relationships actually function. By the time the consequences arrive, the liars are gone. The damage remains. This is why beauty becomes a liability rather than an asset in long-term relationships. It creates an environment where honesty is too expensive and lies are too profitable. And when truth disappears from the system, intelligence cannot compensate. It only accelerates the collapse. If truth disappears so completely from her environment, the obvious question becomes this: who, if anyone, still tells her the truth? The answer is uncomfortable because it reveals just how hostile the system is to honesty. There are only a few categories of men who consistently speak truth to highly attractive women, and none of them do so because the system rewards them. They do it because something else overrides the incentive to lie. The first group is very small. These are men with an unusually strong commitment to integrity. Men whose sense of self-respect depends more on accuracy than outcomes. They value alignment with reality more than approval access or reward. When they speak, they say what they believe to be true, regardless of how it lands. These men are rare, not because integrity is rare, but because integrity is expensive. It costs social capital. It costs relationships. It often costs intimacy. Men like this routinely get labeled difficult, insensitive, or arrogant, even when they are precise and calm. Their reward for honesty is exclusion. Most people learn quickly that this price is too high. The second group is men on the autism spectrum, not because they are virtuous, but because they are literal. Social optimization does not come naturally to them. The idea of modifying truth to manage someone else's emotions often does not register. Accuracy matters more than harmony. Precision matters more than comfort. These men tell the truth not as a moral stand, but as a default setting. Strategic dishonesty does not come easily to them. And because they are less sensitive to social punishment, they are less deterred by her displeasure. Ironically, these men are often dismissed first. Their feedback is perceived as rude, blunt, or socially inappropriate, even when it is the most accurate information she has received in years. The third group is family. Fathers, brothers, male relatives who are not trying to sleep with her and have a long-term investment in her well-being rather than short-term access to her body. These men can afford to tell the truth because their relationship with her is not contingent on her attraction. They can endure her anger. They can absorb her disappointment. They can survive emotional explosions without losing what they need from her. More importantly, they can attach consequences to truth. This is critical. Information without consequences rarely changes behavior. Consequences are what convert insight into learning. Romantic partners cannot enforce consequences without risking total loss of access. Family members can. They can withdraw support. They can create boundaries. They can apply pressure. They can refuse to enable destructive behavior. Their leverage is not sexual, it is structural. Notice what all three groups have in common. They are immune to her beauty's power, either because they value something more than access, lack sensitivity to social punishment, or are bound to her by ties that do not depend on attraction. Everyone else is exposed, and everyone else adapts. This explains why honesty is not just rare, but systematically eliminated. The men most capable of delivering truth are also the men most likely to be removed from her environment early. The system selects against them. The result is an information ecosystem where lies are abundant and truth is almost extinct. Imagine trying to navigate a desert with a map that is wrong in every important way. The more confidently you follow it, the further you get from water. That is her situation. She is dying of deception without knowing she is thirsty. And because she does not know she is thirsty, she does not seek water. She believes she understands relationships. She believes she knows men. She believes she has insight. After all, she has decades of consistent feedback to support those beliefs. What she doesn't have is accurate feedback. This is why attempts to help her often fail. When someone tries to tell her the truth, she does not experience it as guidance. She experiences it as hostility. The message is evaluated not on accuracy, but on emotional impact. If it hurts, it must be wrong. If it challenges, it must be insecure. If it limits her, it must be disrespectful. This is not narcissism. It is conditioning. Years of rewarded validation train her nervous system to associate agreement with safety and disagreement with threat. Her reactions are not calculated. They are automatic. And because her reactions punish honesty so effectively, even men who start with good intentions learn to adapt. They soften, they hedge, they stop saying certain things. Eventually, they stop saying anything that matters. This creates what economists call moral hazard. The person with power is insulated from the consequences of their decisions, while others bear the cost of accommodating those decisions. She sets expectations. Men absorb the fallout. When relationships fail, she receives explanations that protect her from discomfort rather than information that could prevent repetition. The system does not self-correct because correction is punished. Over time, this produces a woman who is confident, articulate, and deeply misinformed about how relationships actually work. Not because she is incapable of understanding, but because understanding has been systematically blocked. Her rare encounters with truth feel shocking, aggressive, even cruel, because truth has not been normalized. It has been framed unconsciously as betrayal. And so even the men who love her most struggle to break through. Fathers and brothers push back. They warn. They set boundaries. Sometimes they enforce consequences. But if she has learned to use emotional withdrawal as leverage, even family can be trained into silence. Guilt becomes a weapon. Distance becomes punishment. When that happens, the final connection to reality breaks. She enters what I call fantasy land thinking, a closed system where her beliefs feed themselves and no external input is allowed to correct them. Her understanding of relationships becomes increasingly detached from cause and effect, but internally consistent. And internally consistent lies are the hardest to dismantle. This is the tragedy of wasted opportunity. The people most capable of saving her from deception are often the first to be rejected and the last to be heard. Not because they are wrong, but because they threaten the equilibrium that her entire emotional world depends on. By the time she realizes something is wrong, the damage is already deep. Patterns are entrenched. Habits are rigid, and the effort required to rebuild an accurate model of reality feels overwhelming. So she doesn't. She stays where it feels safe, where agreement flows, where truth remains extinct. The easiest way to see how warped this environment becomes is to compare it to something ordinary. Not extremes, not pathology, just average experience. Women who are not exceptionally beautiful live in a different feedback system. That difference is not moral, it is economic. When a woman is average-looking, men still have incentives to be strategic. Attraction always introduces bias, but the bias is weaker. The potential reward is lower. And because the reward is lower, men are less willing to absorb the emotional cost of dishonesty. They disagree more often. They push back sooner. They walk away faster. This changes everything. When an average woman behaves poorly in a relationship, the consequences arrive quickly. Men don't tolerate chaos indefinitely. They don't absorb endless entitlement. They don't stay silent through unrealistic expectations unless there is a strong compensating benefit. So reality speaks. It doesn't shout. It doesn't explain itself politely. It simply withdraws. Interest fades. Effort declines. Relationships end. And because these outcomes happen early, they create learning. Average women still get lied to, but not comprehensively, not universally, not for decades at a time. They receive enough honest feedback mixed in with the strategic communication to calibrate their understanding of cause and effect. They learn what behavior pushes people away. They learn what effort is required to keep someone. They learn limits. This learning is uncomfortable, but it is real. By contrast, highly attractive women experience delayed consequences. Men tolerate dysfunction far longer. They absorb emotional volatility. They rationalize behavior they would never accept from someone else. They tell themselves the trade-off is worth it. This tolerance prevents learning. When bad behavior is consistently accommodated, it does not feel bad. It feels justified. When unrealistic expectations are met, they do not feel unrealistic. They feel normal. The woman learns the wrong lesson. She concludes that her standards are reasonable because they are being met. She concludes that her reactions are appropriate because they are being tolerated. She concludes that her approach works because men keep showing up. But they don't stay. That is the key difference. Average women experience friction early and often. Attractive women experience it late and catastrophically. By the time the consequences arrive for the beautiful woman, they are severe. A string of failed relationships. Men who leave suddenly. A growing sense of confusion and resentment. And because she has not been trained to connect her behavior to outcomes, she interprets these failures as random rather than causal. She tells herself the men were flawed, weak, intimidated, not ready. And again, the environment supports this interpretation. Friends reassure her. Men she dates validate her. No one benefits from telling her the truth. The contrast becomes even clearer when you look at development over time. Average women refine their relationship strategies through trial and error. They adjust. They compromise. They learn what matters and what doesn't. They discover the difference between desire and commitment. Beautiful women often refine their strategies around maximizing attention, not stability. Because attention has always been abundant, they learn how to generate it, not how to sustain connection. This is not a character flaw. It is a response to incentives. When attention solves problems in the short term, it becomes the tool you rely on. You never develop alternatives. And when attention stops working, you have nothing to replace it with. This is why beauty becomes a trap. It delays the feedback necessary for growth while creating the illusion of success. The woman believes she is winning because she has options. She does not realize she is losing because she cannot convert those options into outcomes. Having many choices is not the same as choosing well. But the distinction only becomes visible when choices start disappearing. For average women, that lesson arrives early. For beautiful women, it arrives late, sometimes too late, to change course easily. And when it does, the adjustment cost is enormous. She has to unlearn decades of reinforcement. She has to confront the possibility that what she believed was strength was actually insulation. That what felt like confidence was actually protection from reality. Most people avoid that confrontation. It is psychologically easier to believe the world is broken than to accept that your model of it is wrong, especially when that model has been rewarded for so long. This is why you often see a widening gap with age. Average women become more grounded, more realistic, more skilled in relationships. Highly attractive women, if they do not actively seek truth, become more rigid, more demanding, more confused. The environment has trained them in opposite directions. None of this means beauty is bad. It means beauty changes incentives. And when incentives change, behavior adapts. The tragedy is not that beautiful women fail. It is that they fail despite having every possible advantage. They fail because the very advantage that opens doors also removes the information they need to walk through them wisely. When you remove friction, you remove learning. When you remove learning, you remove wisdom. This is why intelligence alone cannot fix the problem. Intelligence needs accurate feedback to function. Without it, intelligence simply builds more convincing explanations for why the same strategies should keep working. And because average women are never fully insulated from consequences, their intelligence has something to work with. Their models evolve. Their expectations adjust. Their behavior becomes more effective over time. Beautiful women must actively fight against their environment to achieve the same result. They must seek discomfort, invite disagreement, tolerate criticism. And most do not because nothing in their experience has taught them that doing so leads to better outcomes. So the system persists. And until you understand how different the feedback environments are, it will never make sense why the most attractive women often struggle the most with the very thing they want most. This is where the tragedy becomes visible. After years of delayed feedback, distorted incentives, and systematic validation, the outcomes finally begin to surface. Not subtly, not gently, but in a way that feels sudden and unjust to the person experiencing it. From the outside, it looks obvious. From the inside, it feels like sabotage by the world. She has options, always has. Men approach her, pursue her, commit time, energy, and resources. She never lacks attention. She never lacks interest. And yet her relationships follow a familiar pattern. Intensity at the beginning, validation, promises, then deterioration, distance, exit. And each time she is genuinely shocked. This is what I mean by turning victory into defeat. She possesses every advantage in the marketplace of attraction, but she uses those advantages with a strategy built on false assumptions. When the model is wrong, more resources don't help. They accelerate failure. Imagine a chess player who is allowed to move twice every turn, but does not understand the rules of the game. The extra moves don't create victory. They create faster losses. Each confident decision compounds the error. That is her situation. She believes attention equals commitment. She believes desire equals tolerance. She believes options equal security. So she leans into those beliefs. She raises standards without considering trade-offs. She tests boundaries without understanding where they actually are. She assumes men will adapt indefinitely because they always have, until they don't. When men finally leave, it feels abrupt. But it is not. It is delayed reaction, months or years of suppressed friction releasing all at once. The man has been uncomfortable for a long time. He simply never told her. Or when he tried, he learned quickly to stop. From her perspective, there was no warning. From his, there were hundreds. This mismatch in perception is devastating. She experiences loss without explanation. He experiences relief. And because she never receives an honest post-mortem, the lesson never lands. Instead of questioning her strategy, she questions men. They can't handle a strong woman. They're intimidated. They want someone easier. These explanations feel plausible because they protect her identity. They also keep her trapped. What she does not see is that strength without calibration is not strength. It is pressure. And pressure without understanding fractures relationships. This is where beauty's insulation becomes lethal. Men will tolerate dysfunction longer for access to beauty, but they will not tolerate it forever. No incentive is infinite. Eventually, the cost outweighs the benefit. And when that threshold is crossed, departure is not gradual. It is decisive. The woman experiences this as betrayal because she never saw the ledger filling up. She never knew there was a debt being accumulated. Every unchallenged expectation, every unaddressed conflict, every strategic lie contributed. When the account finally goes negative, the relationship collapses. And because she has many options, the collapse does not force immediate introspection. She replaces the man. The pattern resets. The same strategy is applied to a new variable. This is why the system self-perpetuates. Each failure reinforces the belief that the problem lies outside her. Each new man arrives with fresh incentives to lie. Each early success confirms her worldview. And each later failure is explained away by comforting narratives. The feedback loop becomes negative in the economic sense. Failure reinforces the behavior that caused failure. Over time, the consequences escalate. Relationships get shorter. Men exit faster. Tolerance decreases. Youth fades. Beauty becomes less overwhelming. The buffer weakens. And suddenly, the environment changes again. This is often when panic sets in. The strategies that worked for decades stop working. Attention decreases. Men are less willing to absorb chaos. The leverage that once insulated her from reality erodes. And because she never developed alternative skills, negotiation, accountability, emotional regulation, the adjustment is brutal. She feels blindsided, even though the process was predictable. This is the cruel irony. The longer beauty protects her from consequences, the harsher those consequences become when they finally arrive. Early correction is gentle. Late correction is violent. By the time the distortion becomes undeniable, the cost of change feels overwhelming. She would have to admit that many of her core assumptions were wrong, that the advice she trusted was misleading, that the validation she relied on was self-serving. Most people do not make that admission voluntarily. So instead, she doubles down. She becomes more rigid, more demanding, more convinced that the world owes her something it no longer provides. The entitlement people criticize is often a defense against collapsing certainty. She is not clinging to power, she is clinging to meaning. From her perspective, admitting error would mean admitting that years of effort were misdirected, that her intelligence was undermined by an environment she did not choose, that her suffering had a cause she could not control. That is a heavy burden. This is why some women become bitter rather than wiser. The pain arrives before the explanation. The losses accumulate without clarity. And because no one ever trained her to see cause and effect accurately, she has no framework for understanding what is happening. The tragedy is not that beauty fades. It is that the opportunity to convert beauty into something lasting was squandered by a system that replaced truth with comfort. She had every chance to build stable partnership, but the tools required honesty, accountability, self-correction were systematically denied to her. Not by fate, but by incentives. When people say she had everything and still failed, they misunderstand the problem. Having everything except reality is not an advantage. It is a trap. And the deeper the trap, the harder it is to escape. If there is any consistent source of truth left in her life, it usually comes from one place: family, fathers, brothers, male relatives who are not negotiating for access, men who are tied to her by blood responsibility and long-term concern rather than desire. These men occupy a unique position in her world because they are not governed by the same incentive structure as everyone else. They do not need her approval to stay. They do not gain status from her attraction. They do not benefit from flattering her delusions. This gives them something rare: leverage. A father can tell his daughter something a boyfriend cannot, not because he is wiser by default, but because he can survive the consequences of honesty. He can absorb anger. He can tolerate silence. He can endure being disliked for a period of time without losing his position. More importantly, he can attach consequences to truth. This is the detail that separates information from learning. When a romantic partner tells the truth, the price is often immediate rejection. When a family member tells the truth, the price can be enforced on the other side. Support can be withdrawn. Boundaries can be set. Expectations can be adjusted. Reality can be imposed. This is why strong male role models are often the last tether a beautiful woman has to the real world. They are the only people who can say calmly and directly, "Your behavior is the problem," and remain present after saying it. But even this advantage is fragile. Because if she has spent decades being rewarded for emotional reactions, she may attempt to use those same reactions on her family. Anger, guilt, withdrawal of affection, accusations of being unsupportive or controlling. And if those tactics work even once the final source of truth begins to collapse. Family members are not immune to conditioning. They love her. They want peace. They want harmony. And when honesty consistently produces emotional explosions, many eventually retreat. They soften, they avoid certain topics, they stop pushing, not because they stop caring, but because they learn that caring costs too much. This is the final tragedy. The people most capable of grounding her in reality are often trained into silence by the same behavioral patterns that distorted her relationships in the first place. When that happens, she loses the last corrective force in her environment. She enters what I call fantasy land thinking. In this state, her beliefs no longer interact with external correction. They feed themselves. Every failure is reinterpreted as confirmation. Every challenge is reframed as hostility. Every warning is dismissed as jealousy or ignorance. Her understanding of relationships becomes internally consistent, but externally false. And internally consistent falsehoods are the most dangerous kind. At this stage, even clear patterns are invisible to her. Multiple failed relationships do not suggest a shared cause. They suggest a hostile world. Men leaving does not indicate tolerance limits. It indicates male weakness. She is no longer learning from experience. She is defending against it. This is why interventions fail late. Friends try to help. She cuts them off. Family pushes back. She distances herself. Anyone who threatens the narrative is removed, not consciously, emotionally. What remains is a carefully curated environment where nothing contradicts her self-image. And that environment feels safe. It feels validating. It feels familiar. It feels wrong to leave. The irony is that this safety is what ensures continued failure. Without truth, there can be no correction. Without correction, there can be no growth. Without growth, outcomes stagnate or worsen. From the outside, people describe this as stubbornness or arrogance. From the inside, it feels like survival. She is protecting the only framework that has ever made sense to her. By the time she reaches this point, change is possible but costly. It would require rebuilding her understanding of men attraction and herself from the ground up. It would require admitting that the system she trusted betrayed her, even though no one intended harm. That admission feels unbearable. So most do not make it. They age inside the same distorted model, growing more resentful as reality becomes less accommodating. What once felt like confidence hardens into rigidity. What once felt like standards hardens into entitlement. This is not because she becomes worse as a person. It is because the cost of updating her beliefs becomes higher than the cost of clinging to them. And when even family can no longer reach her, the system completes its work. Truth is gone. Consequences are delayed or misattributed. And the opportunity for course correction narrows with each passing year. This is not a failure of love. It is a failure of structure. A world that lies to someone consistently from adolescence onward does not produce wisdom. It produces certainty without understanding. And certainty without understanding is the most fragile foundation a human being can build a life on. When people ask why some beautiful women seem to live in a fantasy disconnected from reality, this is the answer. Not ego, not malice, not stupidity. Isolation from truth. And once that isolation becomes total, even love struggles to penetrate it. The most valuable lesson in all of this is not about beauty men or dating. It's about truth. Every human being lives inside a feedback system. What you hear repeatedly becomes what you believe. What you are protected from learning becomes the place where you are weakest. And the most dangerous advantage you can ever have is insulation from consequences. Growth does not come from being admired. It comes from being corrected. If the people around you always agree with you, always validate you, always protect your feelings, that is not safety. That is stagnation. Comfort without truth slowly disconnects you from reality, and reality always collects its debt eventually. This applies far beyond relationships. It applies to careers, leadership, identity, and self-worth. Any area of life where you are shielded from honest feedback will quietly become the area where your judgment fails first. Not because you are incapable, but because you were never allowed to learn. The people who genuinely care about you are not the ones who make you feel good in the moment. They are the ones willing to risk tension, distance, and discomfort to tell you what helps you in the long run. Truth often feels like rejection at first, but in time, it becomes protection. If this perspective resonated with you, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Share what stood out to you in the comments or how this shows up in your own life or relationships. And if you value calm, honest conversations about human behavior, power, and self-awareness, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for noise, not for outrage, but for clarity.